Hello and welcome to the Fellowship Phase, an Adventures in Middle-earth podcast. I'm Josh and that's Callum. We're going to give you inside information on how to find your own path through Tolkien's world.
Edu Galahan Ninril na dosta Ianen gala estant Nin halef Tief na Ite na gala.
There's a bit of sort of Gungan about your pronunciation of Elvish.
yeah. That's where Tolkien got the idea, the Gungans, yeah.
Oddly, this is like the third time that Jar Jar Binks and the Gungans have come up recently. I'm starting to get worried about his reappearance in our lives. Hello, Callum.
Or any campaigns.
Hello, Bert.
Any reveal of the Dark Lord.
Do you know what? It's going to be even better this week because normally there is a semblance of balance between the chaos of Callum and the order of Josh.
Yes.
I think Bert is on the side of chaos.
Yes, 100%.
I think Bert as a player is more chaotic than I am, and as a DM as well. I think he brings the fun chaos to the D&D and the real spirit of it.
Not with Deor.
Well, not with Deor.
I feel like I try to restrain myself and try and keep it Tolkien-esque and not Conan-esque.
Well, I think you succeeded, and that's what we're talking about today. Watch as I take control here.
Hey, that's the name of the show.
Here's the name of the show. We're talking about Deor, your Rider of Rohan, as a character, about creating the character, and about some of the lore around that, because I know that when you created the character with Callum, there was a lot of Tolkien lore and then homebrew lore that was weaved into that, which became very relevant to the plot. So hopefully there's something there which is helpful for players around working with the DM, working with the lore master on some lore, integrating that, weaving that together, and what that might look like. So should we kick off talking a bit about the idea of Deor in the first place? Like, what was the initial idea? Was it yours, Bert, or was it collaborative with Callum? How did Deor start?
So it sort of came out of necessity because Deor, not my first character. I'd been playing dwarven warrior called Durnir for a long time. Very much sort of closer to what I would normally want to play. You know, for a all posh Englishman, I've always identified with the dwarves quite a lot. Essentially, out of necessity, I had a child around the time, sort of mid-campaign, and I realised that I wouldn't be able to attend every session for obvious reasons. So I got together with Callum. We decided to create a character who was a bit mysterious, who had his own agenda, who could come and go from the campaign, and it to work narratively, not just be like, Deor's got some business, off he goes, or like, quick, a horse is in trouble. So making this character whose, I wouldn't say aims are not aligned with the party, because he's very much on the side of good and he worked with the party the entire time, but who potentially had reasons to be elsewhere.
Yes.
Narratively. So that was our starting point before we got to anything about Rohan, anything about the Kinstrife, anything else. That was what we needed to make. And then obviously we're going to tie it in to your character, to Halmir.
Mm-hmm.
So Callum, I know, is very interested in exploring the background of Ravanian and the Kinstrife and all this kind of stuff. And there had been hints within the campaign, I believe, towards this kind of stuff. I remember Durnir smashing a tomb. Was that something to do with it? Anyway, there had been kind of instances in which the history of Ravanian had come up, so I knew there was something in Cam's mind, and he gave me essentially the background of the Kinstrife, and we attempted to make something fit there.
Yeah, so I guess for the listener, if you haven't listened already, then the Kinstrife I think it's a really fascinating bit of Tolkien's work it's this idea that there was the civil war in Gondor, but it kind of spills out into Rivanian and the north, because the reason for the kinstrife. Now, we've done this on episode 35 in a lot more detail, so I'll very quickly, briefly go through it. But basically, Gondorian king, Rivanian in the north is part of Gondor. One of the Gondorian kings goes up, defeats some people. His son, they basically gets close to the Rivanian people, and this guy Valacar forms a relationship and has a son. So the son is like half Gondorian, half Rivanian, and that leads to the kinstrife, because the son Eldacar, he comes to the throne. People are like, he's not, there's this like northern blood in their line, and people challenge him. This guy Castamir challenged him because he's not of sort of enough Numenorean blood, and it's this whole idea about what is it to be true Gondorian, and it's about faithfulness to the Valar. It's not about any sort of bloodline shenanigans, which is really nice. But that for me as a DM was like such a great thing, where we're playing in Rivania, we're playing in Wilderland. Where's the history? This is the history that I can bring in and bring stuff up from the south, and is an immediate hook. So then we were able to work on that before. And over and above that, I think the interesting thing is that who are the Rohirrim? The Rohirrim are the Eothed. Who are the Eothed? They lived in the north of Rivanian. And where did they come from? They came from the east. So when the Rivanian kingdom kind of fell and moved, they moved west and became the Eothed. So the Eothed are the descendants of the Rivanians. So it links, to me, it's like the link between Rohan and Gondor. That's where this all comes from, is from the kinstrife or the events that led to the kinstrife. So if you got a character from Rohan, to me, it felt like a really natural fit to be like, oh, that ties in, I can tie this in to the history and the lore and then give you that. So that was really exciting for me.
And how quickly did that come into it then? So this was all revealed much later in the campaign to me as a player, discovering the intricacies of what Deor's agenda was and his link to Helmet. But during the character creation, how quickly did that idea of the kinstrife come into it?
Almost immediately. I think Callum had the idea for Valacar's chosen this kind of secret society, I think, first. And he asked me to create a character around that. And he suggested a man of Rohan, which I was very on board with, which I think it works perfectly with what we were doing with referring back to the kinstrife. There's something, certainly in the novels and movies as well, the Rohirrim are very, I don't know how much kind of Anglo-Saxon history or stuff you read, they've got that, even though they're based on, I think, Huns or Franks or something, in Tolkien's obsessive knowledge of all of this ancient European lore, but they've got this very Anglo-Saxon sense of nostalgia of, I think, this is my English nerd coming out, of the ubi sunt question, which is it's a motif in poetry which Tolkien actually takes from some Anglo-Saxon poems, which is the where is, where are these great people, where have they gone, where have the cities gone, which is what Anglo-Saxons wrote in poems because they lived in the ruins of Roman Britain, and that's where that whole where's the horse and the rider come from. Whereas the Anglo-Saxons had a great sense that they lived in the shadow of greater times. So I think just the Rohirrim works very well with this idea of lost civilizations. So yeah, that's essentially
really cool.
I didn't know that.
That's the whole thing. The first stage, goes into the a whole way through Middle Earth is particularly the elves, because they can actually remember it, some of them, but men as well, looking back to Numenor and looking back to Gondor at its peak. There's a sense of continued decline, isn't there? So that's a really interesting link.
Did you feel, a question for you, but did you feel that, as a backstory, it's quite a gift, and there's a huge amount to get into here, and it immediately kind of grounds you in the setting and with one of the other characters. Did you feel pressure playing a character that had quite a significant backstory that was immediately for the lore master, there's this thing and it's important and it's linked to other characters?
Yeah, so not so much actually the bit about the campaign. I'm pretty sure that we can make it interesting, we can make it work in the interaction of the characters. In terms of like the lore and making sense of it within, because I am probably, of all of us, I'm the least well versed in Tolkien. Read The Hobbit as a child, read Lord of the Rings when I was sort of 10, 11, as most people did. But I was actually a bit worried. We've got someone like James in our group, and most people I imagine who play AIM will have someone like James who will pick up on inconsistencies, not in a mean way, but so I think working.
To James's credit, I don't think he ever says that in game.
No, he never would.
I don't think he would ever say that. So like,
but I think I felt more pressure about making the things I wanted to do consistent with the world, because if I sort of, as you've seen in other games, in other D&D games, if I sort of give in to my instincts, things get very strange very quickly. And so it was more a pressure to keep it consistent with the world and to not ad-lib and to sort of stick to the plan. And then especially, there was a long time between when we came up with the idea of Valacar's chosen and the opportunity to reveal it. I was playing as Deor, I think, for several months before we actually had the chance to kind of have the big moment at the tower, the oath, the reveal, all of that kind of stuff. And that was quite tricky to like not jump the gun, because I wanted a big moment, to actually wait for a good time and not just have like, random campfire, hey, come over here to the bush, let me.
I am so impressed. I would have struggled a lot.
I would have struggled,
knowing that there was the potential for that really good role play moment, and that satisfaction of like unveiling information that that other people don't. It's always satisfying. Did you then? Was there any kind of coordination between player and DM going to the tower and knowing that was going to be this significant moment of trying to find, is Baranor here? Halmer's looking for his uncle. Discovering that he had been kind of kidnapped, but that the tower was this place that kind of unlocked the whole reason for his quest. That at the tower we were going to either find Baranor or we were going to find out what he was doing. So did you, Bert, and Deor know that was kind of coming, and you were kind of thinking, right, when we're at the tower is the time, or was it very much an in the moment thing?
It was more. There was almost a point of no return by the time we got to the tower. I don't know. I know you've talked about this stuff on the podcast before. The plot where Baranor was also a member of Valacar's chosen.
Yes.
Okay, so that is known to the folks at home.
It is, yes.
Good. It almost felt like there was going to be a point of no return, as in we were going to go to Gundabad. We were essentially entering what was going to be a massive dungeon, and it would have felt inorganic to have a major role play moment like this in Gundabad. And again, as I said before, like there was no real way to have it during kind of random adventures. So the tower, I think I do remember coordinating with Callum, basically just saying, I'm going to do it now. And sort of, I think we talked about the oath several months before and just reminding of each other of what it is. And it's amazing that it worked so well, because you had no idea. And the way it played out, you could very easily just attacked me.
It was such a powerful moment in game for me as Halmir. This, the curtain being pulled back, the call and response, the idea of being given. I suppose there was a lot of exposition was being done, but because it was happening in character and in dialogue, it didn't just feel like here is a massive piece of lore that we'll just read out to you. It felt organic and in the moment that was the obvious time where you would unveil this information.
I think that my lesson there was that the best way to give a lore dump is to get one of the players to do it. I love doing that. I love texting secret messages or like giving people information in advance, things that they know, because then I can just sit. My favorite moments as a DM, I think, have often been where I just got to sit and watch you guys roleplay, and I'm sitting there and like, I'm quote unquote running the game, but like for me, the peak running the game is when I just sit and say nothing for 30 minutes. Like,
it was a really special moment,
and because you held on to it for that long, it was like earned, And I would have struggled to hold on to that for that long, but because it came after this like build up, and like everyone knew there was a mystery, and you guys had like the same swords, so there was like, why have they got the same sword? It was just like so, and then when he did say it, everyone was like on the edge of their seat to hear it because you'd earned it.
It gave us some fresh momentum, I think, going into. I mean, Helmi was always driven to find his uncle, but I think getting to the tower and his uncle not being there and actually something bad having happened could have been quite deflating and felt almost like a sort of a defeat or a setback, which in some ways it was. But it felt like having the moment of understanding that there was this secret society, this secret order who were, had values and principles of goodness in the world and protecting for the future, and that his uncle was part of that, and that was part of the reason he disappeared. And Deor, this good man that we met on the road, is not here just by coincidence, and that there is importance to that. It felt almost like a victory in the moment. It felt like a success for us to then go into Gundabad.
Yeah.
I think that was nice. It could have been quite demoralizing, I think, if there hadn't been that character moment, which happened pretty organically. I also think that, obviously we didn't know, but you could have literally said to Bert the session before, here is all this information that we've just made up right now that you can just say in the moment. You could have done that. There was absolutely no sense from me that that's what happened. It felt completely earned that this had been true from the very beginning all the way through the campaign, that there'd been little breadcrumbs had been left. Deor was always kind of mysterious. There were a few times, I think I'd maybe been on watch or something and made good rolls, and you'd said about, I kind of looked at the sword and it felt familiar. So all the way through, I had a sense that there was something about Deor as a character, and I was just kind of waiting for it to come out. So it felt very earned.
I think, given the name of this episode, Deor and Valacar's Chosen, maybe we should actually explain what the Valacar's Chosen is at this point, or who the Valacar's Chosen are.
Okay, so we know the backstory of the Kinstrife, which is one of those important layers that Tolkien's obviously woven into the kind of tapestry of Middle-earth. When you two talked about this before Deor sets off on his horse, how did you envisage Valacar's Chosen?
I mean, I know the way we talked about it makes it sound like a secret society, which is not quite right in the sense that it's not like the Masons. It's not a high organized idea. I think we saw it as a very loose collection of men who sort of pass knowledge, father to son or uncle to nephew, as is in the case of Deor, who maintained this link to the past, and that's how I always saw it, as essentially torchbearers through the age. So rather than acting in some kind of coordinated, mysterious manner, they essentially were keeping the flame alive of the connection between Ravanian, Gondor, Rohan, between the realms of men. So I less saw it as a kind of agenda-driven society and more a collection of like-minded individuals. I don't know how to say it. If that makes sense.
It does. Something we spoke about, I won't say in the past, if that episode is released before this one, when we talked about magic, we talked a lot about the power of words and oaths in Tolkien, and how oaths are incredibly kind of magical and important. And the impression I was left with as a character and as a player, the Valacar's Chosen, was it was that idea of an oath that is taken and is passed on largely in secret. You're not swearing it in front of a court of people or surrounded. It's, like you say, father to son or uncle to nephew, and passed on that way. It was for me, it was the taking of the oath, and then having that purpose that even if no one else knew about it, you were abiding by.
So the oath took quite a lot of writing, not just like the original wording, but then translating it kind of painstakingly into Sindarin, Kenya? Sindarin, I think, through various online dictionaries. I'm not quite sure I got the grammar exactly right, but I tried to articulate that sense that it was a kind of a lonely oath almost. I think the literal translation is I think the first person says, unless you wanted to save this for later in the podcast.
No, do it now. Why don't you two do it call and response style?
We can do it in English first.
I mean, I can probably only do it in English.
So,
Well, I tried to do it in Elvish, which was the intro to the episode.
Right, Bert, well, since you were the one passing on the oath, that means you're the first person to go.
though the nights grow long,
My torch is lit.
though the years grow short,
My blade is drawn.
though the road is long,
My feet are on the path.
I thought quite a lot about the wording of that. So the idea of, so the person one's phrases, the nights grow long, the years grow short, the road is long, was very much, even though this is supposed to be kind of all men, was very much based on that Rohirric Anglo-Saxon sense of, you know, carrying the sort of small light of civilization through very degraded times, that you are kind of keeping something alive, and that you're waiting for the bad times to pass almost, which is something that actually occurs in the poem Deor. So I took even though Deor is actually one of the names that you can choose from the original book, Adventures in Middle-earth, it is also the name of an Anglo-Saxon poem, which has the refrain, I can't remember in translation, but he's basically talking about, he's a bard who's been exiled from home, Deor, and there's a recurring phrase every time he talks about some terrible event in history. He says, like, that has passed and this will also pass. So built into the character Deor from the very name was this idea of enduring through the hard times to get to something better. So that's what the person one stuff was about. And then you have the person two, so the person taking the oath. You have my torch is lit, my blade is drawn, my feet are on the path. I think that speaks to a kind of very Tolkien sense of individual heroism that I was going for there.
It feels very purposeful. There's a clear purpose in response to, like you say, that sort of degraded world around them.
And I guess what you also did on top of the Valacar's chosen was like had a really strong reason to have left Rohan. So at this time, when the time period we were playing him was set in the rule of Fengel with an F, not Fengel.
So confusing. Fengel and Fengel.
Very confusing. Yeah, so Fengel is a notoriously bad ruler of Rohan in the lore, and I guess that maybe conflicted with Deor.
So yeah, so I think in terms of backstory, we worked out why he would have left Rohan, and we had this because obviously he's a long way from home. Yeah, how do you properly justify that man of Rohan is there? And thankfully, the setting at the time, you have this position where you have a notoriously kind of corrupt king of Rohan, Fengel. You have Thengel, who is currently in exile in Gondor at the time of the game. And Thengel is the father of Theoden?
Yes.
Yeah. So you clearly have these two camps, and it made a lot of sense to make Deor belong to one camp, and have Fengel then become, I don't know how much of what we talked about was from the lore and how much was us just expanding on the idea of him being a bad king, but him being particularly brutal to kind of other races of men, for example. So the Dunlanders, the Hillfolk.
Dunlandings, yeah.
So we talked about the Valacar chosen objecting to the excesses against Fengel, against the Dunlanders, and the corruption of his captains there. And we never actually met the character of Fulk the Watchful, who was not a rebel against Fengel, but very much a member of the opposite camp. And we decided that Deor would have been exiled for writing a poem in support of or praising Fulk the Watchful. I never actually got around to writing that poem. But in fact, I ended up writing quite a few others.
What a fabulously Tolkien reason to be exiled from anything. Right.
I love Deor, and I guess we haven't actually said what he was, but he was a warden. And what you did was, well, the first thing I wanted to say was, I think you hit the nail on the head for me if you're running a game in Wilderland or any part of Middle-earth, and your players are choosing characters that are from very far away. Like we see in the books and the film, like people coming from one part of Middle-earth to another is a rare event.
Mm-hmm.
And really with Halmir and Deor, you both hit on the head really clearly why you were there. And to me, that like the character was built from there. Like, why are they here? So that was really important. And then above that, with the warden, it really was able to lend into what you're talking there about, that Anglo-Saxon tradition of stories and looking past, and that you were able to bring that in so often. And it felt like the character that you built was so linked to the idea of the character. The rules really complemented what you were trying to do with him. So it was just like a really great synergy, where sometimes it kind of feel like this is the character I'm role-playing, and then you go into combat or some other situation, you do a rule, but it doesn't, like, you do you have some ability, it doesn't really feel tied into the character, whereas this all felt like it tied together really well.
How did you find playing Deor? Because you're right, he's quite different to some of the other characters that you've played, or the playstyle that you have dungeon mastered. How did you find playing a slightly more straight-laced or reserved character?
I found I had to work a lot more. Essentially, I had to think from one of the reasons perhaps I was slightly more reticent in the games than I am in D&D games is because I was actually thinking more, what would my character do, as opposed to my other characters who are just Bert. That's an orc. And so actually working my way backward from the key traits of Deor, as in he is far from home, this is what he cares about, this is what his motivations are, and this is what he cares about. And there are some, it wasn't completely alien to the way I like to play, so I don't think it's a good idea I don't think anyone would enjoy playing a character that is so different from what they normally do. I would never tell James to play a human champion fighter, for example, D&D. You'd hate it. So I think with Deor, I lent into the idea of the kind of battle poet in a way, and the idea of the poems, the songs, kind of glorifying combat and death in battle. So you get that what I like to do, which is high risk, high reward kind of play, and then also combine that with Deor's personality, which is this sense of kind of somberness and nostalgia and kind of faded glory, and they all kind of worked well together. So going into fights, thinking about the poems that you would write about this, thinking, from the perspective, he is essentially a kind of battle bard, so he's thinking about what it looks like and what it will sound like when it is later put to song. So yeah, that's essentially how I melded like my instincts with what Deor required me to be.
I think it's, from all the games we've played in together, like your strongest character in terms of like the sense, you capture the sense of who they were. And I've written that down to ask, because I think that's a real challenge, and I found this as a player, is that sometimes you can get into a little bit of a rut and you end up playing yourself. And one of the things that I really enjoy about role-playing games is that opportunity to explore thinking differently and trying to put yourself into someone else's shoes. And like, you know, having empathy for your character. And like you did that fantastically, but you also, as you said, didn't go completely off the deep end and make a character that you would enjoy playing. Like Deor was still really funny and came up with some really sort of crazy plans, but most of which worked. So like I think one time Josh was in this game and I tried to go really serious because I usually, as a player, tend towards bards and being a bit silly and, you know, being the charismatic character. So it was very serious dwarf. And it was too much. It was way too much. It was far too serious. Like, it was almost ludicrous how serious they were. The other two players are trying to have fun, and I was just like, "No, my family are dead." No, like, I just couldn't light him up. And after that, I was like, "That wasn't quite right." So I guess as you play more and you have different characters, you can. You get there, but maybe that would be a bit of advice that it would have been helpful for me at the beginning. Is that like, don't just completely lean into what you are and what you enjoy doing. Like, challenge yourself a bit, but also make sure that it's still fun to play the character.
And find something unique to your character that you like playing with, essentially, that is not going to be the same as something else you do. So lots of people play the same type of character again and again and again, which is fine. But I think I would say, especially if you're playing in a different system, find one aspect of that system that you want to lean into. Don't change too much. So I really like the songwriting part of it, you know, the rules around song. Have you done a podcast on?
We haven't. That's a great idea. Although someone recently wrote in and said, do you know when you say in all the episodes, we should do an episode on that? Do we ever do them? So we were going to do an episode on songs.
Because one of my favorite moments was in Rivendell after Gundabad, rolling a natural 20 to write a song.
Yes, I remember that.
And I wrote the song as well. I'm not sure it was quite natural 20 worthy, but that, and then we then had that as a, you know, it's essentially the poetic equivalent of smithing. We then had that as a tool in our arsenal, which I can't remember the exact bonus it gave us, but if we'd sort of sung that at camp before we went into battle, it would give us some kind of bonus.
Yeah.
And we had a few of those actually by the end of Deor's thing.
Songwriting rules are very cool. We definitely need to come back to that, and we'll I think maybe share some of those songs if people are happy with that when we come to that. I can't remember what that song was called.
It was A Song of Gundabad. I have it here. And it's not entirely original, because I'm not genuinely a poet. And what I did was I took. Sorry?
You're telling me you're not actually a battle poet? Hang on a second. You've just been pretending this entire time.
I know. But I took a poem by G.K. Chesterton from a random book of the complete works of G.K. Chesterton I had on my shelf, and basically changed obviously the wording, but changed the line length and the rhythm so that it worked for something that we, would do. So obviously I really liked that, but I wrote quite a few poems over the course of being Deor, and that's not something that I would normally do, or necessarily feel comfortable doing. So it's only through the character that I found that a really fun mechanism to play with, the idea of writing songs that would then give you little boosts.
I like that.
Fantastic. Yeah, I actually really looking forward to talking about songs now. Maybe we should have you back, Bert, to talk about songs in Middle Earth, because I feel like you'd be the right person to ask, and then we can maybe share some songs. I guess in terms of when you were building the character, just talking about the sort of, I guess, the rules slightly, you were drawn to warden, which feels like a natural fit. I guess the warden in the new version of the game is very different. It's much more like the wanderer, and the naming is a bit confusing, but the wanderer in Adventures Middle Earth is a very like kind of, I guess, battle bard is probably the best way to describe it, isn't it? Were there any rules that you particularly enjoyed, like any sort of features of your character or cultural virtues that really helped bring out that character you were trying to play as?
So there are a couple of things. So I liked the idea of being, a support class essentially without sacrificing too much, especially as I was going to be coming and going a lot. So I felt like actually being someone who would like arrive and provide a boost. I think the way we were building Deor as someone who was quite, wouldn't be in every session. I think then attaching that to a support class character felt like it would make a real difference when he was there. It was like, hey, Deor's here and he's got the Songs of Slaying, which gives us a boost to, it felt like it made more of a difference than just having an extra man on the field. So it worked really well with what we were doing there. And then also, I think my imagination was caught by the Songs of Slaying thing. I thought that was really cool. And the way it sort of taken something, which is, I think there is something very similar in D&D. I'm not sure, having never played a bard in D&D, but I think there's a similar thing in the Swords Bard or whatever it's called. But it felt very appropriate to the setting.
Yeah, when you use the rules, that one and the other one I felt was very thematic was Discourse, where you could essentially use a charisma skill of your choice to unsettle the enemies and have a parley. So it was very much like you're using your wordsmith to, have an impact. It's quite a wordy rule looking back at it now, but you a couple of times use that to good effect, and it also kind of puts mechanics to what you wanted to do in role playing anyway, I feel.
Yeah.
I mean, the one thing I would say actually about the Discourse thing, because I can't remember who I did it to, but I used Discourse. I wrote this speech. It was sort of very, very effective, and then I rolled like a 2 at the end of the Discourse thing. So it's something I don't know, as someone who's more afraid with the rules than me, I would almost suggest when you do something like that, roll before role play. Roll to see whether the Discourse would work, and if it doesn't work, then role play some terrible like speech or something that is not going to work, as opposed to putting a lot of effort into saying something incredibly eloquent and worthy and then rolling very low.
Yeah, that can be the
narrative dissonance. It was was it Modred?
It might have been with Modred.
Modred, that's the one.
And I usually, the way I handle that as DM is often like, if someone's had a really excellent bit of role play like that was, and then I try to reward them. So I give them advantage in the roll, or sometimes I say it auto succeeds if it wasn't a hard check. And then if it doesn't fail, that's quite a hard thing to deal. Like when there's a disconnect between what the random roll of a dice is and what a player does, doesn't really match up. The way because that's a difficult thing to do. And as a DM, I don't think it's really your place to say why someone's failed. So I usually take that as a question, and I would say to Bert, like, why do you think this, objectively to us, very excellent speech hasn't had the effect you wished? And then usually the player comes up with a much better explanation, but also I think that can help with managing that sense of failure, because failure can be frustrating at points, but if you put it back in the player's hands, then it's just another opportunity to role play and explore that character, which is a good thing. One thing that I thought I should explain, but it just give a little bit more information about some of the stuff that I put into Valacar's Chosen when I was writing it. The idea, I guess, was to find some explanation that we know that Gondor and the Rohirrim are linked, and in the books we hear about the red arrow that is sent to Rohan to call them to war. And I was like, where does this red arrow come from? And the other thing that I was really intrigued about when I was reading the lore was the Horn of Gondor that we see Boromir blow so effectively in the film. Now that's written about in the books. It's the horn made from something called a kine of Arol, which we talked about before. It's a special type of, I think, buffalo or bison or something that lives in the plains of Ravanian. And so my idea was like, well, clearly there's all these artifacts, so let's have this link. Valacar's Chosen brings them in. So to me, I thought Valacar's Chosen was Valacar had these men that he wanted to unite Gondor and Rhovani and bring them closer together. So he appointed free Gondorians and free Rhovanians to sort of help as his bodyguard, and they turned into this more sort of secret, I guess is not right the word, but this sort of long-standing thing, bringing back that memory originally. And when they first formed, they each were given a horn fashioned from the kind of a raw, and also a quiver of arrows. And I thought, why is the red arrow a symbol of friendship? I thought, well, maybe they're next to Mirkwood Forest. There's maybe some sort of sap or poison that the Rhovanians use. They dip the arrow in red, and that's where the red arrow comes from. Because I don't think it's actually ever said where the red arrow comes from. So I was like, trying to like tie up some loose ends of what's in the lore and then like insert it in to that sort of almost like jigsaw piece that's missing. And I found that quite fun to try and answer some other things. And I also thought about like the history. So who else would have been members of this through history? So I thought maybe Vorondil, who was a Stewart of Earnil, who was one of the kings of Gondor. He forged the horn of Gondor that Boromir carries. So maybe that's a long-standing tradition going beyond that horn. And the other person was Barandir, who was a Gondorian. He carried the red arrow to the Eothed and brought Errol to the aid of, I think it was Círdan, who's the king of Gondor. And then also Errol, who was took that from the oath of his father. So, why is this connection? Well, maybe it's because of Valacar's Chosen and that torch, as Bert put it, that they've been drawing through. So you could use this in your game, Valacar's Chosen, but also like, maybe I can ask a question. So we've talked about Valacar's Chosen, we've talked about Deor and how we implemented a sort of our own idea of sort of like tying in the lore to the game and adding to it. So if people were going to try and do something similar, like why did this work well? Like if you were going to do something similar, why did it work well for you, Josh, as a player, and Bert as a player as well?
I think the strength of it was Tolkien's very thorough in his work. And obviously with the appendices and Silmarillion, the history that he charts back is very detailed, which is great to understand the world, but it doesn't always leave that much space for creativity. Like we were saying that you want to try and stick with the established lore. I think here you both did a good job of looking at a bit of established lore, the kin strife, how that affected the area of the world that you were in, and then use that as the seed to kind of grow this extra bit of homebrew plot, all of which was very in keeping with Tolkien. And what I then felt was, it was unclear to me until quite late on, because I deliberately didn't read about it or anything, if Valacar's Chosen was a Tolkien thing or a Callum and Bert thing. It was unclear to me where it fitted in, because it fitted very naturally into that space. And I think because of that, it was almost like a sort of force multiplier, because it was good and it felt like it was part of Tolkien and it felt like it was part of the game, and all of it brought together gave it a nice bit of strength. So I think being in keeping with the lore and finding a bit of space that you can almost shade in was the sweet spot for you.
I think it also worked that the Valacar's Chosen is, yes, it links to these kind of great ancient histories, but it's fundamentally a very low level thing. It doesn't fundamentally alter Tolkien's word in any way. And I think if we'd done something about a character like being from a lost line of kings, or something very grandiose, I think that would have felt unnatural. I think it would have felt like me, Bert, imposing my own character on the world. Whereas the fact that Valacar's Chosen is a small group of people who are kind of wandering the earth and maybe putting a finger on the scales, but they're not engaging in large scale battles. They're not, you can believe that they could exist within the world of Lord of the Rings and not have been written about. Whereas if you invent something that is so grand and so kind of deep and mystical, that the immediate thing is like, well, this would have been talked about. But yeah, so I think keeping it grounded in a way.
For me, I was just thinking about when you were both talking there, and I actually what I would suggest, because what this came from really was me having questions. My questions were like, what did Eldacar and the Gondorians do when they were north? What did they build? Did they have any treasure? Where did that come from? Why is there a red arrow? Where did the Horn of Gondor come from? So I guess like read a little bit about the history and lore of the area that you're playing in. So whether that's Eriador, and so some of the questions just came into my mind. There was like, what happened to the Endwives? That you could build something from that. So I guess it's like finding the questions that everybody has about Tolkien's work. Because although he's very complete, he also left a lot of things unanswered. He's not like some authors where he like spells out the exact way that every society works. So find some questions that you're interested in that haven't been answered, and then try and find answers to them. And then if that answer makes sense in Tolkien's lore, then you're on the way to creating your own Valacar's Chosen.
So you sort of work from the text outwards. So I wouldn't say come up with an idea and then try to squeeze it in.
Yeah.
Find something in the work and build on it where there is space to build on it. If that makes sense.
That does make sense. Is that? I think. Oh yeah, and maybe I can end by asking you both about your swords.
A specific question, or just
tell me about your swords?
I'll go first, perhaps, because Helmir. I suppose Helmir. The idea of Helmir came first. Maybe I don't know. The sword was a vital part of establishing Helmir as a character, because I think I potentially came up with Gilfalas, which is Syndrome for the Star of the Shore, before Helmir as a character.
Wow.
And I had been reading some of George R. R. Martin and was thinking about Sir Arthur Dane, who is one of the Kingsguard, and he is the Star of the Morning, I think. And his family he's the greatest warrior, and his family have this famous sword. And I liked, there was something about that kind of mythology I really liked, and I'd sort of been thought experimenting with what that would look like in Gondor, and that kind of led me into Helmir as an idea as a character. So the idea that his family had this sword, and going back to what we were saying earlier about the idea of things from a past age and things in the contemporary time maybe seeming insignificant in light of the things from the past age, it was this incredible heirloom they had, which no one could necessarily kind of live up to, and that Helmir, as a young man, knew it was important, as I think we often do when we see our families' antiques and heirlooms that are lying around. You recognize that they have an importance and they belong to the family without necessarily understanding the story. It then goes missing with his uncle, and that is the kind of call to action for him of, there's a question now, I will follow it.
And to Deor's sword, well, I think Helmir came first in terms of creation, and we were linking everything to Helmir. So I knew that I had to have some kind of thing that would be an immediate hint that there's some kind of connection without giving everything away. So the idea of having this elvish forged sword, partially because there are so many things like that in Tolkien, it is not so rare as to have made the link immediately obvious, but enough to plant suspicions in the mind. And then in terms of how I imagine Deor, I like to think of things in like certain like cinematic moments or little montages, and just so I imagined this the night of his exile, Deor being called by his uncle Hiorma to a tent by the Entwash, dark of night, and then the same experience that Helmir gets later, being inducted into Valacar's Chosen with this oath, and then being given the sword and then sent out into the world. So it was a kind of symbol of that that link to the past that Valacar's Chosen represents, and the fact that it's elfin, I don't know what the preferred. James will know. But I think that was important to have elements of it that carried the trace elements of Elvish culture as well, because that's ultimately everything in Lord of the Rings, that it all ties back in some way.
Yeah, I think you had inscriptions on the swords that only became clear after you both were in the tower that you were at the north, where you found these sort of artifacts in this hidden chamber, and the swords actually came into because you found in that tower that there was two statues, one sort of dressed as a Gondorian, one dressed as a Ravanian, and after a successful investigation, you found some slots that the swords went into. Those two swords together were needed to open the vault to get to the sort of rewards, which was some sort of magical items and a key, which you still don't know what that does. And that was the sort of the end of Baranor's quest, really, was this key, which I'm actually going to be a central part of the next campaign. And the inscriptions on it were written in Adunaic, which is the old language of the Númenóreans, and that read, "Lead bravely, nobly, and respectfully." There was an inscription in Taliska, which is the Tolkien language that the Ravanians spoke, although it's kind of like really small print, and it's a bit like Gothic, and that was "Spread knowledge, understanding, and respect." And then finally in Sindarin it said, "Be true to allies, no matter how old the bond." And then I think in a hybrid language, on the statues that you found, there was a thing saying, "When a man of the south and a man of the north stand side by side, swords outstretched, the door to true friendship shall open before them," which is nowhere near as poetic as anything that Bert wrote. But I I quite enjoyed the idea that you guys and like, for me as a DM, like having Deor come in, he just allowed me to enrich the story that was already there. So it was like that co-creation that we talked about with Elleras before was such a boon to me. So sometimes I feel like if you're coming in as a character later on in a campaign, it can be challenging to like establish why they're there and a link to the other characters. But like, we would really recommend this approach of like trying to build that character into the lore that you're already planning to play, because then as a DM, it is a gift. I thought this would be a short episode, and it's ended up being.
I thought that was wonderful. I really enjoyed hearing about the Anglo-Saxon.
Yeah, that was
of
fascinating.
The past and everything. I didn't know about that.
I did not know that.
I mean, I'm not sure I articulated it correctly. I was kind of waffling at the point. It is
No,
true.
you were
I
not.
don't know whether I explained it as well as I perhaps could have, but
No, I think you did. I
Yeah.
thought it was absolutely fascinating.
Definitely understood it, and really added something to my understanding of Tolkien and the Rohirrim in particular.
I could read the Song of Gundabad to finish. So this is a reworking of G.K. Chesterton's The Last Hero, lest I claim entire credit for it. It's a sort of Lord of the Ringsification with changes in rhythm and lineation. The wind blew out from Bjorn's hall from the dawning to the day. We rode and ran with sword and shield to break and carve our way to Gundabad, mountain grim with scars of ancient wars, with peaks that may put out the sun and shroud the ancient dwarves. The tide of battle changes, so may all battles shift. We stole our kinsmen back from them with cunning deep and swift. And now they rage with warg and spear to break and bar our way, as the wind blows out from Bjorn's hall from the dawning to the day. Yet we will bless them as they fall and curse them as they lie, when on their skulls the swords we swing fall slashing from the sky. That hour when death is like a light and blood is like a rose. You never loved a friend, my friend, as we do hate our foes. One sound shall shatter all the spears and break the trumpet's breath. They never laughed in their whole lives as we shall laugh in death.
No emails except on party business. And comments, suggestions, and questions to thefellowshipphase@gmail.com. The long year turns to its close. Much we have accomplished these last seasons. Our fellowship disbands, but is not broken, and we will return.
On the next episode of The Fellowship Phase.